University to bring you this important conversation today. We are so grateful to Dr. Shai and to both of our panelists for making time for us today. And I just want to say, a few years ago, a rabbi friend of mine pointed out to me that for the first time in Jewish history, the world's Jewish population is nearly equally split between Jews who reside in North America and Jews who reside in Israel. So while there are certainly Jews all over the world, the vast majority of Jewish people today are among these two populations. And this unprecedented situation has given rise to a pivotal shift in how Jews see ourselves as a distinct and unified people. So clearly there's a lot to unpack here, as we're finding that the experiences, perspectives, and attitudes of Israeli and American Jews can be quite different. So what does this mean for us today, and what is it going to mean for future generations? I'm really looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say about all of this. So thank you all for being here, and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much, Lael. You managed to touch the topic, but in a delicate way, and I hope we'll unwrap it, kind of more, into the some sensitive areas of it. So thank you so much. We'll start with something that is the here and now. This last Thursday, an image came up my newsfeed on Facebook. Warsaw's train station flooded with tens of thousands of people, mainly women and children, carrying suitcases on the way to, well, nobody knows where really. Somewhere in Europe, most probably. Away from their homes, escaping for their lives, looking for a safe haven. And this photo was taken by the Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Dr. Nachman Shai. And he wrote the following words: Warsaw's train station, this afternoon. Our own families escaped from this place 80 years ago on these trains. Now, thousands of refugees are waiting for these trains to take them to other places in Europe, away from the war. Women and children only, seeking a secure place to stay. I will continue to fight for anyone escaping this war. I want to welcome you, Minister Nachman Shai, the Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs. Yeah, you're muted.
Unmute. No one can mute me. Okay.
Yeah.
Unmute. Okay. Politicians will never let you mute them. I mean, this is our way of living. So we are never unmuted. Never muted. Anyhow, thank you.
All right. Let me give some context to this, and that will kind of show my appreciation for you being here. You just returned from Ukraine over the weekend. These were pretty intense days, and then you came back home to a pretty intense political arena just around the question of refugees. And now you're at the end of a very long day. So therefore, still in your car. So first, thank you so much for giving us the time and being here, because I know your schedule has changed again and again in the last few days. And I want to start with your visit. You were the first Israeli official to arrive to the border of Poland and Ukraine, and you just returned. And before we go into politics, okay, boring politics, I just want you to share some of your impressions of what was it that you saw at the border.
Well, I traveled to Poland, and I got to the border between Ukraine and Poland. Our mission was helping the community in Ukraine. There are around 200,000 Jews living in Ukraine, and after long deliberations with them, we realized that some areas of responsibilities that we can help them. So we allocated $3 million from my ministry's budget, a lot, and we figured out that if we can help them in purchasing food, providing security, transportation, and to get out of the cities and so on, we should do it right away. And it was
your
helpful
efforts,
because they were ready for the war.
So your ministry was focusing on helping the Jewish community.
Yeah, I deal with the Jewish community. It doesn't mean that we don't care for the other Ukrainian people. I'll talk about that in a minute. But before the war, it was mainly our major focus to figure out what those 200,000 Jews need. We, as much as the war gets closer, we call the Israelis to get out of Ukraine. This is our responsibility towards Israeli citizens. And then we negotiated with the community, what do they would like to do? And they said, we would like to stay in Ukraine. And if you help us on this, on that, so two major Jewish organizations, one is a Joint Distribution Committee, JDC, and the other is Chabad. This is very much our responsibility. I don't believe there's any other state on earth that has such a responsibility to Jews living out of the country. That's me. That falls under my duty as a Minister of Diaspora Affairs.
Right.
And that's what we did in the weeks coming to the war. And then the war broke out. And after a few days, I figured out that I should see by my own eyes the situation within actually Poland, which receives most of the refugees, over 1.6 million up until now. And I can assure you, by the way, since the beginning of this symposium till the end, a few thousand else will be added to the list. So far, almost 3 million Ukrainians left their country. 3 million. It's really unbelievable.
It's unperceivable, right?
Yes,
can you, if I want to ask you, you were a reporter and, when you started your career and you're a journalist at heart, after all, right?
Yeah.
If you can share with us, like maybe even one moment or one story or one site that you saw as the border, because, we sit in our
First of all,
photos.
I can give you one impression is no men, only women. Only women. It's at the beginning you don't realize these are women. Long march from Ukraine to Poland without men. You see dogs and cats and boys and girls holding their mothers or their grandmothers' hands. Once in a while, you see a man probably sick or from any reason, because all the men, brothers, husbands, other members of the family were left behind. So it's the world of women, of female. This is something that it's half families. It's not all full families, it's half families. And then you look at them and they are dressed like you and me, the same Uniqlo, okay? You have a certain image of war refugees. That's not what you see. People went for a weekend. They took light package with them, a plastic bag, the Barbie they like, a toy, only one single toy holding in their hands because they could not carry anything. They used to take their car or a train close to the border, and then they walked for hours. They was extremely tired, and then they had the first hot meal on the borderline. You can see how hungry they were. I mean, I'm old enough to tell you that I've seen a lot in my life. Right. I saw refugees, I saw wars, I saw death, I saw everything, but I've never seen such a thing because those people have just lost all their life, except their life. I mean, they lost their belongings, their property, their husband, and I mean, probably will they see their mother or not, you never know. And then I met Marina, for example, later on in a place which was taken by the JDC, and she was sitting there. She changed for the first time her clothes. She said, "This is the first clothes that I can change after a few days on the road." Her twins were sitting next to her. Her mother was feeding them, and I look at the twins and I said, "This is exactly my grandchildren." Yali and Leo, my grandchildren, were sitting there because I'm also used to feed my grandson. And they were holding her all the time. And she said, "I left in 50 minutes. I just heard the bombs. I heard the bombard. I knew it's coming. I pick up a cab, told my husband who was stayed behind, I think he's a doctor, but I'm MD, I'm not sure. And she ran to the train station, picked up the train, went to the border, crossed the border, were taken by JDC staff from there, and she's on her way maybe to Israel. But it depends on her, because maybe she doesn't want to stay.
Marina was Jewish, right?
She is Jewish. She is Jewish.
Right.
But there are millions of people that are not Jewish. And they are also being held by Israel and by other nations. We send them a lot of humanitarian aid. We just open up a field hospital within Ukraine and so on. Israel is very helpful. I mean, we have special responsibility, unique responsibility to refugees. This is why you voted from my tweet when I went to the train station in Warsaw.
Yeah.
I looked at the people, and it reminded me of our people 80 years ago. They were in a similar situation, looking for a shelter.
And then Nachman, as you stand there, and I guess, you know, it's very powerful what you're saying, and I guess it really changes your perspective. So as you stand there, you know, an Israeli minister, your thoughts is, well, we have to help the Jews come out of here, or we have to help refugees, whomever they are?
Every refugee. And there is a certain, I would say, debate in Israel, because the country is small, and the people say, how many we can take? I said, don't give me any number. This is not Jewish. We have a long history of being refugees. I shouldn't remind you that, because like me, our roots are in wandering around Europe, or wandering around North Africa, or wandering around somewhere else. This is the wandering Jude. What are we at the end? Only in the past 75 years, we have a state for ourselves, third time in our history. So mainly and primarily, this is our own responsibility. And I message, as a journalist, I had to stand up next to the border, and this is the first time I said it. And from there, any opportunity I have, 3 times a day on radio or television, and yesterday on the cabinet meeting, I said, well, let's take as many as we can. They don't want necessarily to come to Israel. It's something different. They can stay in Europe. They can go all over the continent and get refugees. They can stay there for 3 years. Some of them, those who would like to come to Israel, we should take them right away. Not just.
But Nachman, you know, it's like you voice the opinion that is very, you know, nice to the ears of Jews around the world, but you came back with this emotional baggage, you know, of visiting the place, straight into a very heated political debate in Israel against voices that doesn't say the same things, like the Minister of Interior Affairs, Ayelet Shaked, who very openly says, we're taking Jews on. This is the state of the Jews, and we cannot take refugees, like any of them, or indiscriminately, because we have a certain purpose. And, you know, it really touches on the essence of, you know, not so much numbers and visas and bureaucracy, but what Israel is. And so where is the debate standing now? It really became your voice against Ayelet Shaked, kind of nationalist.
I think we made some, yes, you're right, Anat. I was really surprised to hear different voices. Thought I still believe that, not necessarily in the political arena. There are different voices, but it doesn't mean that if we are in a minority, it means you're right. I mean, you can still be in a minority, but in this case, I honestly believe, from all the feedback I get from all kinds of sources, that the majority of the Israelis, hundreds of them have already traveled, hundreds, to Ukraine, to Romania, to Hungary, to Slovakia, to Belarus, to Moldova, helping those refugees voluntarily. No one asked them to do that. And even within Israel, I understand that now, maybe not in the cabinet, maybe not in the Knesset, but I represent most of the Israelis that fully understand the significance of people that have no place to stay overnight, or to stay for a week, or to stay for a month. That's how long it will take. And I believe that we will win. First of all, we don't hear any numbers any longer. No more numbers, no more quota.
Yeah. Sheked had
as many as possible.
To change her.
Yeah, we changed already.
Voice.
And also we figured out that we can allow more and more of them to come. As many as they want. Anyhow, there'll be no more than few thousands because most of them would like to stay as close as possible to their family members who are still in Ukraine and they want to return there as soon as possible. Why should they go to Israel if they can go to Germany or to Sweden or to any other, to France or Spain or Italy and to stay there for a short time, giving all what they need and wait for the war to be over? That's what they want. So I did convince many of the Israelis that this is just a fear which is baseless. This fear is baseless. They're not going to stay in Israel anyhow, and they will go to their home country, to their homeland, as soon as the war is over.
Right. I mean, you're kind of claiming I have the public sympathy in my more kind of universal approach and humanistic approach to this crisis. However, at the end of the day, it's a matter of policy. And here, there was a fierce debate and what's going to be the formal policy? I mean, would Israel take non-Jewish refugees and open its gates? You're saying, well, they're not going to come in millions, and for sure, right? But it's really more of a moral question, right?
More of them will come to Israel, more than my colleague, the Internal Affairs Ministry expected. Israeli families are going to take care of them voluntarily again. They will host them, feed them, give them shelter, give them all they need. This is again a wide movement within Israel of people expressing their will to support the running away Ukrainian families and individuals. And that speaks for itself. And wherever I go around the country, people say, where are they? We would like to help. So I think about this kind of readiness to host the Ukrainian in Israel, we will overcome those voices that express some reservation. That's what I believe in.
Right. Can you refer to any organizations that you saw, Jewish organizations involved in aiding the refugees? Are they present there? Did you get to meet them? Who are they?
Yeah, I mentioned JDC, Chabad, Israel Aid, Hadassah Hospital, Shari Tzedek Hospital, Sheba Hospital. Soon, within a day or two, a field hospital will be based on the Ukrainian side of the border with 100 beds, state-of-the-art hospital, and there will be hundreds of medical staff helping the Ukrainian people. All Hatzalah is there. Actually, I don't remember how many of them. On the borderline itself, I saw a nurse. Suddenly, an Israeli, Malka, from Poria Hospital, from Tveria, she jumped on me, said, wow, I'm so happy to see you. I said, what do you do here? I said, I go everywhere in the world where people are in trouble and help them. She's a nurse for Poria Hospital. I've never met her before. But Malka is there on the border, waiting. She's a nurse, waiting for people to come and get some help. I think this is something which speaks for itself. No one paid for a trip. She paid for everything. She stayed there. It's cold. It's freezing. You are in California. You don't know what cold is. But she knows. She is in Ukraine. Ukraine, Poland, and she pays by her own money just to feel that she is doing something holy, I would say, helping other people.
Right. Yeah. This is kind of the Israeli and Jewish aid is indeed
right. Of course, the Jewish agency is there. I shouldn't forget, and even the Israeli official bodies like the Foreign Ministry, Native organizations, and other, they help non-Jews as well. It's not only about the Jewish community. They know that at the end of the day, we are all human beings, and every human being should help the other. I'm not the first one to say it. Just go to the Bible, go to our Jewish roots, and you'll find it explicitly there. This is what we have to do.
So talking about Jewish roots and talking about Jewish morality, I wanna shift to the reason we scheduled this event way before anyone believed Russia will invade Ukraine and everything seemed to be, like the world is in a totally different mood. I want to welcome our two other guests, Tomer Persico, which you may know, and Julia Cinnamon.
Hi, Tomer.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi.
Hello.
And, in this event, I wanted to touch on a topic that is not often discussed openly, the relationship between Israel and American Jews. What was for many years a strong and warm alliance of the two largest Jewish communities in the world, as Lael mentioned, well, now, as they say, is complicated. And I hope in this short conversation, we'll try to understand the roots of the tension between Israelis and American Jews. And for this purpose, Nachman Shai, let me reintroduce you, because you have some other credits beside your current job. So it's not common in Israeli politics, if I may say as an Israeli, that politicians get the job that really fits their qualifications. And Dr. Nachman Shai seems to be one of those cases. And now it's a little bit of kind of your line of credit, so get ready. He was the Senior Vice President and Director General of the Jewish Federations of North America, now known as JFNA, in Israel. During his time as a member of the parliament, the Knesset, he founded and co-chaired the Caucus for Strengthening the Jewish People. Before becoming a minister, he spent 2 years of teaching in American universities, Duke and Emory, and then returned to Israel. Earlier in his career, Nachman Shai held a number of positions in Israel's army, media, and government. Among them, he was the army's spokesperson, the editor-in-chief of Galei Tzahal, the Army radio station, and Director General of the Ministry of Science, Culture, and Sports. I would also like to welcome our two other guests to this conversation. Dr. Tomer Persico, hi Tomer, is a scholar of Jewish studies and the academic director of Kolot, and a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. He's a leading thinker in Israel nowadays on contemporary Jewish identity and spiritual trends in Judaism. He recently returned from 3 years in Berkeley, where he was a visiting scholar. Julia Cinnamon was born and raised in the Bay Area, and for many years, Israel played an important role in her Jewish identity. She's now the West Development Director of the Jewish organization Repair the World, a board member of the Jewish Silicon Valley, and is deeply involved in many ways in Jewish life in the Bay Area. Hi, Julia.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Nachman, if I or Minister Shai, sorry, I'm being too Israeli and too informal.
It's first name based. Okay.
I would actually like to start with your recent position before you became the minister, and that is the 2 years you spent in the US. And you had time to teach students and also visit communities and give public talks. And I was wondering, what kind of insights this time gave you about American Jewish life and their thoughts about Israel? Was there anything new about it for you?
Yeah, well, I realized with my students through my conversations with them that there is a challenge for the state of Israel. Many mainly young American Jews, most of my students, most of them were Jewish, and they came because they were curious to hear from me about Israel. But then they had questions about basic issues that I was not familiar with. And I realized that with the young American Jewish students or young American generation, they tend to ask questions, and they had to raise doubts about where Israel is. And they don't get anything anymore as if it's done and deal done. They do have doubts about that. And well, I dealt with that. But then when I take it to the general phenomena, I said, well, we have to invest much more in working closely with them because this is the future of American Jewry. And if we lose them, and I have some doubts whether we invested in the past so much, now we do much more, then what's the future of American Jewish community? And by that, I guess they also represent the non-Jewish students on campus, on many campuses that have an issue with Israel. about the Palestinians, about the people in Gaza, about Israel's war with either the Palestinian, again, with the Hamas in Gaza or on the West Bank and so on. They want to know what's the future of those guys. What do we do with them? Why are we still holding the territories? What's the situation with peace? Why this liberal democratic country is not able to reach peace with the Palestinians? And there's two ways to handle it. One is to close our eyes and ears and say, well, it's not just liberal, progressive, young boys and girls for the Boston.
Yeah,
open the country with their eyes and say, we have answered. We have to run a dialogue with you. It can't be any longer one-way communication between American and American community, Jewish American as a whole, and the state of Israel.
Right. So, but was it, I want to ask it more on a personal level. Was it a shock to you? Kind of, oh, they're not like their parents, you know, and you know their parents mainly, right? This was your audience when you were part of the Federation. And these are Jews who are strongly aligned with Israel and support them. And then you meet these punks, I don't know, this guy, right? Julia, sorry, I'm just,
it was a new, yes, you're right. I was not shocked. But I said to myself, well, something has changed. There's a new generation. And again, we cannot sleep on the memories of their parents or grandparents from 1948 and on that were helping Israel for years. Those generations either fade away or are not active any longer. And we have to take into consideration that there are new trends, new directions within American, in general with American youth, but especially with American Jewish students. And we have to work and closely with them and figure out what the issue is. We take them to Israel for birthright. We help them for Masa. We invested in a lot of them, but probably it's not enough.
All right, so what I really want to try and do in this short time that we have is like ask the question, is it those things on the surface or there's something deeper? But before we go into that, and before I get to you, Julia, because I think Nachman Shai is talking really about you. I mean, I want to ask Tomer kind of the same question. You spent 3 years teaching about Israel at Berkeley, a highly politicized arena. And, you know, not an academic analysis, but kind of what did you learn about American Jews and the voices about Israel?
Right. So, yeah, I was a visiting scholar for the last 3 years. But, you know, first, I hate to sing too much of Dr. Shai's praises in his face, but I do have to say that he was the single most prominent voice in favor of accepting, of course, accepting non-Jewish refugees. And I have to say, I thank him personally for this. And I think his voice was heard, and that's fantastic. So really, I really appreciate it. Okay. So I was the visiting scholar in Berkeley, and as you might expect, my courses were mostly inhabited by young Jewish students, really coming to learn. I understood about their identity, really coming to learn about what it is that means. What it means to be Jewish. They were mostly, you know, either non-denominational or sort of secular, or you know, in one or another denomination, but not practicing too diligently, let's say. And they really wanted to know. And what I also understood is how little they actually understand of Israel's political, I would say, DNA and makeup, about how the state of Israel is so much different from the United States as a democracy, right? They are
So their basic assumption that, sorry, Tomer, the basic assumption is that Israel is like a small America, kind of America on a smaller scale.
Basically, the assumption is that any democracy is a small America, right? Any democracy is a small USA. And the possibility of an ethnic-based liberal democracy doesn't even cross their mind. And if it does, it's wiped out. I mean, it's not conceivable to have a democracy that actually represents the sovereign will of a specific ethnic group. now.
All right,
Okay.
you go. You already dive into the pool,
Yeah,
and I want to get to you, Julia, and if you can share with us, a little bit on how you grew and mainly your relationship with Israel.
Yes, of course. I think for me as an American Jew, and I don't know if this is true for everyone of my age demographic, I have always felt a strong and a deep connection to Israel. I remember when I was in third grade, I brought a flag from Israel to my classroom to show my homeland, a place I'd never been in my life. And I felt a stronger connection to Israel than I did to the US, than I did to anywhere that my grandparents and great grandparents lived. And then again, at 16, going to the Kotel for the first time, I felt this sense of home that I have never felt in my life. And for me, I grew up in the Jewish community. I was very, very involved with pro-Israel organizations on my college campus. I was trained by AIPAC. I went on the Hasbara Fellowship Program. I did David Project. I really followed that trajectory of a Jewish pro-Israel leader. And in my early 20s, I began to really do a deep dive into social justice. And that's where I found a lot of complications with my identity as someone who cares about Israel. And I think we see in the studies, 59% of young American Jews feel that justice and equality are core tenets to how they express their Jewish identity. And I think that's at the core of this issue when these Jewish values teach us to be some way, and then our voices are not being heard.
Julia, can I ask you at this moment where you feel like you get the sense of wait, maybe I should kind of, the story of Israel is not the story that I was told, or that there are kind of issues for me here?
Yeah, of course. I think for me, I lean into this, again, Jewish value of elul ve'elul, this both and perspective, this idea that this is not a black and white issue. There's a lot of gray area here. And I think something, Dr. Perisco, that you were talking about is that Israel is not a mini United States. And so when young Jews are looking at racism, systemic oppression in the United States, it doesn't translate the same way as it does in Israel, but it's still something we're concerned about. It's still something we don't feel is being handled just as it isn't in the United States. And I think that's some of the complications, is the world view that we have doesn't always translate.
Right, but do you remember this moment or something that kind of you thought, oh, Israel is doing so and so, and I cannot identify with it, or anything like that? Where did it start, and how kind of the questioning starts?
I think for me, right after college, I got very involved in the justice space. I was working for an educational equity nonprofit where I was learning about justice and hearing stories of folks in the United States, their experiences that were vastly different from my own. And that's where I think I really began to question things. And at that moment, as someone who cares about Israel and is very critical of Israel, I felt this sense of not belonging in either community, of not belonging in Jewish spaces because of my feelings about Israel, and not belonging in progressive spaces because of my feelings in Israel. And even looking back,
you lost the two ends, right? You felt like you don't have none of the things that you thought you have, right?
Yes.
Nachman, are these kind of the voices that you heard from your students of, what Israel is really is not the story that we were told, and kind of what does it mean to our Jewish identity?
That's exactly what I said. I was ready to confront their criticism, whatever it is. And I stayed overtime beyond the class hours to talk to them, and over the weekend, and a lot of Zoom conversations, one after the other. But I realized it's not just about Duke students or Emory students, it's much wider. And as I said before, now in my present position, I'm just focusing on those students, and again, young American Jews. For example, on American campuses, you mentioned some of them, we try to serve the students through Hillel, Chabad, and Olami branches in those universities, so they can come in and at certain talks or even a kind of a class for between 10 to 15 meetings where they learn about Judaism, where they learn about Israel, and they have an opportunity to get answers to their questions. But that's just the basic. It's almost 101 for many of them that are not familiar with the story of Israel. And by the way, they're not familiar with Judaism as well. And I think that this kind of basic knowledge is so missing in their education. I don't know why is it so, but now we try to bridge the gaps and do it. It will take time. It's like an investment. You don't see the profits right away. You should wait for a few years.
Right.
We just pay the price for previous years that those things haven't been done. We deal now with twins on high schools as well. And we actually extend our operation. And no need to say that the United States is the center of everything we are doing.
So if I can reflect on what Minister Shai says, Tomer, it's really, Mr. Shai, your argument is, well, we neglected this issue and it grew bigger. And it's a matter of education and bridging the gaps. And Dr. Minister Shai, you also mentioned, maybe young Jewish Americans are not also familiar so much with Judaism as maybe Israelis know it. And I want to ask you, Tomer, is this the case? Is it only a matter of, let's just invest in education and bridging gaps?
I mean, there certainly are big gaps, and I totally, I agree with Dr. Shai about how there's a misunderstanding about Judaism even here. But the issue is not more knowledge. I think at the heart of the issue, except for what I said before about the different conceptions of democracy, of a nation state that is democratic, except for that, there's another difference, and that is about how we define Judaism or how we understand modern Jewish identity. And here I think there's a very wide, not only a gap, but a split, a real split in the road between Israeli Jewry and American Jewry, or even diasporic Jewry in general, which just doesn't understand their own Judaism the same way as Israelis do. Okay, and in very brief and simplistic terms, there's a Judaism that is more ethnic and national, and there's Judaism as a religion. It's two distinct things. It's two distinct ways of understanding how we are Jewish, what makes us Jewish. And if in Israel people are Jewish because they're simply a part of a collective, of a national collective, of an ethnic collective, there's just a big tribe, right, which has a state, which has sovereignty, right? In diaspora, and obviously in the United States, Judaism is understood as a denomination. It's a sort of a faith, a confession. It's what you do on Sundays or on Saturdays in this case, right? And what makes you Jewish is that you adhere to certain, if it's observances and if it's values. And by the way, these values are also of interest, and maybe I'll get into that later if you want or not. But just to understand, there's a different conception of what Judaism is.
But Tomer, I want to take it. For me, it's fascinating what you say, and your argument is basically, well, we're just two different creatures. We call ourselves Jewish, right? But Israeli Jews and American Jews are just different creatures. Maybe to the extent that they don't come together as one big family anymore. I want to raise the question.
No, obviously we're related, but we are two different interpretations of Judaism in modernity. Judaism,
and I see Dr. Shai, Minister Shai nodding yes. So you agree, but I just wonder. Which is great, but Tomer, what does it mean in practice? What does it mean? How does it make you as an Israeli Jew different in practice than American Jew?
Well, let me just in a few words again explain. Perhaps the most dramatic event in Jewish modernity, more than the founding of the State of Israel, even more than the Holocaust, was the emancipation.
Don't say that. Couldn't be, yeah.
Was the emancipation, meaning when Jews say emancipation, we don't mean the American interpretation. We mean the naturalization and getting equal rights in Europe, basically, and in the United States for Jews. And that meant Jews came out of the shtetl, right, came out of the ghetto, and they redefined their Judaism. And most Jews, or many Jews in diaspora, redefined their Judaism as a religion. They were either Orthodox or Reform or conservative, and they got equal rights in their states, and their nationality was German or British or French or Belgium or Dutch or American, right?
Right.
The Zionist movement from its inception rejected that option and defined its Judaism as a nationality, right? And then struggled for its own, recognizable sovereignty, et cetera, right? And it even was antagonistic from the beginning to religion, to Judaism as a religion.
Right.
So there's this big rift between these two options of defining Judaism. And what it means is that when we talk to each other, many times we just don't understand, right, what we mean by Judaism and what is important to us in order to preserve our Jewish identity. I'll give you an example, right?
Yeah, please.
The most simple way this translates into reality. When Israeli Jews care about their Jewish identity, they want to protect the state of Israel. They want to protect Jewish demographics in Israel. They want a demographic continuation of Judaism in Israel. They want a strong army, etc. When American Jews want to preserve their Judaism, they want to preserve tradition. They want to preserve values. Now, what does that mean? It means a bit of different things, whether you're Orthodox or conservative or Reform. But let's take Reform. Reform that defines its Judaism, among other things, as moral, humanistic monotheism, right? Something like that in large terms, liberal, progressive, right? That means that an American Reform Jew or an American non-denominational liberal Jew that wants to preserve their Judaism wishes to further these values.
Right.
And what happens when they see that the state of Israel is antagonistic towards those values or doesn't live up to those values, or even, much less than lives up to them, right?
Right.
That creates, for this Jew, in order to preserve their own Judaism, they then have to reject Israel.
All right, so this is a very strong sentence, right? Because you're saying these things are even oppositional, and Minister Shai, the very simple fact that the state of Israel has a minister of diaspora affairs means that Israel doesn't see it like that. They see your role as bringing everyone together, but maybe I would try to be a little bit explicit. Maybe your job is impossible. Maybe, there's a contradiction in term, in the sense that, you're, as an Israeli, think, okay, we'll reach out, to diaspora Jews and we'll bring them closer to us. But Dr. Persico says, well, there are some contradictions here. If you would like to relate to this.
First of all, my job is impossible. That I agree with you. But then I try to see what's possible in this impossible. Most of the Israelis were not aware of this ministry until the last 2-3 weeks, as Tomer rightly mentioned. When I became outspoken on the issue of the refugees, said, where were you hiding before? Why did you invent this ministry? I said it was there for 20 years. It was there for 20 years originally from political reasons. Let's admit that sometimes ministries are being established of Israel in order to compensate a certain person that was active in the elections. They didn't know how to compensate him or her. So they gave him a semi-ministry with no budget and said, okay, this is your job from now on. But
you're disconnecting.
I believe something is connecting and building bridges between Jews living in Israel and out of Israel. And by the way, of work to do within Israel, we call it peoplehood. Tomer familiar with what I say. Now we raise peoplehood within the Israelis. Maybe the lack of knowledge about the diaspora in Israel is because Israelis don't know what diaspora is. They don't. This is a surge. We speak about the changes in American Jewry, the changes from the 2 or 3 generations ago to the present generation of young American Jews. it applies to Israel too. I mean, the same changes that happened in Israel. This generation of young Israelis, including Knesset members, including government ministers, are ignorant about the diaspora. They've never been to a shul out of the country, don't understand what community life is. They don't know what Jewish Federation is. Okay?
Right.
It sounds simple. I led Knesset members' trips to the United States for a week. They saw for the first time Orthodox, Reform, and conservative rabbis sitting together. In Israel, sometimes they don't get close to them. They don't understand how can they talk between the three of them, because they read about denominations that in Israel, the conservative and reform movements are out of the political arena and the Jewish life as well, because most of the Israelis supposed to be Orthodox, which I refuse to accept. And I guess Tomer has a lot to add about it. So in many ways, visiting Jewish communities, not only, by the way, in the United States, but in other states as well, was a fresh experience for them to see that we are not alone in the world. There were Jews in the diaspora before, there are today, and they'll be there forever. Not all the Jews are moving to Israel. So what kind of relationship we want to build between them and us, if we can, and I believe we should.
Right. Thank you, Minister Shai. Julia, I want to go back to you and see how you feel about what Tomer said, because he said, things that are I think are pretty painful. Basically, your dream shattered because what you see as your Jewish identity did not align with what you see in Israel, and maybe it's not doable. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all really important pieces and conversations. I think for me, this idea of denominations in Judaism is a relatively new concept. And I do think we are at this pivotal moment as a national, international Jewish community to decide what we consider Jewish in these coming years, if we really want to survive and thrive, especially as Gen Z, as young millennials express their Jewish identity this differently. And what I will say is, I study the Torah weekly with my rabbi. I go to synagogue as much as I can, and I don't feel most Jewish in those spaces. I feel most Jewish through other things, through expressing my values through service and social action, than I do in a traditional Jewish space. That doesn't mean that I don't pray. That doesn't mean I don't believe in some form of God. But what it does mean is that many Jews, such as myself, feel isolated, and they feel really put off by traditional Jewish life. And as congregations across the country are questioning, where are the young people? Why aren't they coming to synagogue? Why aren't they joining until they have children? I think we really need to meet young Jews where they are. And even in this conversation, we're talking about young Jews as if they're this fantastical thing that we don't understand. How do we get to them? I think we have an opportunity to reframe Jewish identity for the next 100 years. And to be dramatic, if we don't do that, we will struggle, and it will be far worse for our descendants.
So Julia, you have an opportunity here to say to, directly to the minister, I mean, what are the ways to get to, Generation Y, Z, and what would make a difference?
I think two things. I think, and I saw this in the chat, grandchildren that are not just not pro-Israel, but anti-Israel. I think we need to have a pathway for folks that might be anti-Israel to still be able to be part of the Jewish community and find a way to have conversation in a way that's constructive, because this idea of pro-anti, we all want the same thing. We all want a form of peace. And these people genuinely do not feel accepted by the Jewish community. And I think too, it takes a certain level of innovation. There are a lot of organizations tailored to young adults that are thinking creatively. Moishe House, One Table, Repair the World, to name a few, finding ways to bring culture, to bring values into Jewish spaces. And then I think the other piece is having people like myself, young people, in the room where it happens, being able to be decision makers and speak for themselves and their generation, I think that's the only way that we can really move forward.
Right. Mr. Shai, do you wanna relate to this?
Julia,
you're
so
muted.
I really don't. Yeah, no, I'm not sure if I fully followed here. So give me,
I will
ask
ask
me
you
a question.
Yeah, I will. Sorry. I will ask you. Thank you for saying that. I will ask you a specific question, and that's something that came up with my conversation with Jewish leaders here, and they said,
Okay.
Maybe the relationship and the power relations between Israel and American Jews has changed. We're kind of used to, I grew up on the notion of, those kind of nice, wealthy, supportive Jews from America, right? I mean, that's kind of the image that many Israeli has of the Jewish community, thriving and supporting Israel. But maybe it's now has changed. And maybe it is Israel's time to support American Jewry in different ways, right? Not economically, not financially, I mean, but do you have thoughts about this?
Yeah, one of the things I brought to my position is to change the paradigm that Israel is in a position to give, not only to get. It's something basic. For generations, we were almost depending on the diaspora, getting all kind of help, money, funds, but also aliyah from diaspora, sometimes other areas of like culture. I mean, you know what I mean. I mean, specifically money. This was really a Jewish tradition, but not only that. Political support. So I said to myself, well, this Israel of 2022 is a different country, is economically and successful, and it can and it should give back. And sometimes it's not a matter of how much, but the question that you come to American colleagues. I approached the reform and conservative movements in the United States, and I said, let's work together on a certain project. What do you have in mind? And they said, okay, let's concentrate or focus on teens, on high school students, because that's where we feel is the weak link right now in Jewish education and their relationship or their connection to Israel. What can we do together? And the next stage is that we are now investing some money, a few $1 million. That's the first time we are doing that in a reform and conservative young movements in the United States, building certain programs within their youth movements. This is something
that's a project of your ministry.
It's a principle. That falls under my ministry. Yes, that's my ministry. Yeah. And I offer the same assistance to other organizations, religious and non-religious. We say, let's work together. Let's find a way for matching. You do something, we'll match you. We do something, you match. So we base it on a different level that we can work together. It's not only what you are doing, and you've been doing so much for us. So it's not just thank you. Let's see if we can come up and help you. And the message here is very powerful. That something has changed. The Israelis finally recognize what was done and feel grateful, but they can give back as well. So that's a new. Also, I encourage as much as possible, and that's also something new. American Jews, not that young, never mind how old they are, to open their mouths and to ask questions and to raise doubts and to sometimes to challenge any given issue, not necessarily on Jewish affairs. Okay, they were told or they were educated that whatever the government of Israel does, it's fine. It's not your business. War and peace, for example. Why is it relevant? Because when a war broke out in the last summer, between Israel and the Hamas in Gaza, it impacted the life of American Jews.
Absolutely.
So I'm not saying that the next stages will be that we consult with you whether to respond to the Hamas attack on Israel, but we should at least listen to you and understand. We haven't mentioned anti-Semitism
that's
so
a
far.
New voice. that's a new voice inviting American Jews to debate, to speak openly their mind, as something which I personally find they're still having difficulty to do, right, Tomer? I mean, from my experience, Jewish communities here are very hesitant about voicing any criticism on Israel.
Yeah.
So what Minister Shai is saying is really a new voice. I mean, Julia, do you feel the same?
Yes, I do. And even in the chat, you know, there's this message of this idea that if you're anti-Israel, you're not a Jew. And I think that's really harmful. I think that our faith tells us to be critical, to ask questions. And I know anti is a very strong word, but we are losing our people if we are turning them away because they do not see things the same way as us. And I will say that the Jewish community as a whole really does do that, really does tell people if they are critical, they are not welcome. And I think that is a huge problem.
Right. You told me about this phenomenon of those who are critical to Israel really find themselves outside their Jewish communities here, right?
Yes, and I'll say for myself, I never thought I would work in the Jewish world as a Jewish communal professional because of my complicated feelings towards Israel. And it was only when I was able to work for a place that doesn't talk about Israel, that really focuses domestically on helping young Jews find an entry point to Jewish life, that I ever thought I could work in the Jewish world. I have many friends that no longer go to Jewish spaces because they are critical of Israel or ostracized from the Jewish community because of their beliefs.
Right. Yeah, that's I think something very, very meaningful, that the Israel issue really breaks the Jewish community apart in a way. Tomer, do you want to relay before we go into questions?
Yeah, I'll just say two short things. First of all, you know, American Jews voicing their opinion, etc. That's fantastic. What we need also is reception for their idea to be heard in Israel. And I think they've been burned before by trying to say things and really being attacked mercilessly by Israelis that don't see them as having any right to speak, or not even as authentic Jews, right? And Dr. Shai talked about taking Israelis, members of parliament, actually to the United States, meeting Reform and conservative Jews, and actually having their eyes open, you know, to other ways of Jewish identity, of being Jewish. That's, by the way, exactly what we are doing in Kolot, right? I'm the academic director in Kolot. We are taking members of municipal, municipal boards, mayors, and municipal chiefs in the United States, and having them meet American Jews, really having opinions change. So that's I mean, first of all, just the actual reception from the side of Israel to opinions from American Jews. That's the first thing I want to say. And secondly, and in short, Julia talked about how much values are more important to her than rituals, right? It's about how you are Jewish in the world. And that connects exactly what I said before. Now, I mean, I'm taking as an example, but of course, like Julia, there are many whose Judaism is a set of values, and it's usually liberal and progressive values. And now, again, what happens if Israel doesn't live up to those values, or even much less so to those values, right? That means that if your Judaism is important to you, not if you're, you know, a lapsed Jewish, and you're not interested in all, but the complete opposite. If your Judaism is important to you, you will be antagonistic towards Israel. That's what we need to understand, and that's what, I mean, it's heartbreaking, right? But it's important to understand. And I mean, that's why we have like Jewish Voice for Peace. It's not just humanistic voice for peace. It's not just, you know, left-wing, liberal, progressive people. It's Jews who care about their Judaism. And that's why they are demonstrating at itself.
All right, we're reaching towards the end, and the chat is very vibrant and a lot of comments. I mean, if you want to ask like really, really short, to the point questions, because I cannot read, you know, the comments are long and they're mostly opinion, but I follow it kind of as we go, and they're fascinating. Maybe I can end up with just a very short kind of practical, each one of you, you know, what is the most kind of practical thing to be done, to mend things, to fix the relationship if we're in a couples therapy now, or family therapy, I would say. And Dr. Shai, you started with saying something I think very important, and that is that you as a minister call American Jews to voice their opinion and to kind of open up the conversation, even if you don't like what they have to say.
Well, Tomer rightly said, it's not only to express the will, also to listen to them. I've been to the States a few weeks ago, or maybe it was 2 months ago, I don't really remember. And when people ask me, what did you come for? I said, to listen. I said, what do you mean? I said, I'd like to sit down with you, groups and individuals, and listen to you. Not only what my ministry should do, but also what should be done, I mean, in general. Because I'm concerned about the relationship between American Jews. I'm concerned about the rift. I'm concerned about the lack of common values, what Julia rightly mentioned. I'm asking myself whether the values that were actually the foundation of Israelis, of Israel and American Jewish community, and Jewish communities in general in the world still exist. And in my conversation with them, I insisted that Israel is still a democracy. It still enjoys freedom of expression, freedom of movement, of human rights. I point out about the formation of a new government which is so diverse, and diverse is a keyword here. And it is the way. For the first time, there is an Arab party in this coalition. There's an Arab government minister, a Druze minister, an Ethiopian born minister. So that's something special, and that's something new, and that can speak for American Jews that are so committed to diversity. So there's so much to show. I would like them, this is the target audience, to know much more about Israel. And even if they may like it or dislike it, but at least they should know Israel, not necessarily from the media or from friends, but to sit down and learn about Israel and study what the Israel story is. There's so much to study. And by the way, Tomer, I'm a graduate of Kolot. So when I wanted, of course, I wanted to learn about Judaism.
Minister Shai, when did you have the time to do all this?
This was
PhD
20 years ago.
And also doing Kolot.
20 years ago, I approached Kolot. I said, I would like to be a student. Firstly, they said, you are too old. That's nice. But then Moti came back to me and said, you're not old, you are experienced. And we would like your experience with us. I said, okay, so from then on, I'm much more experienced than I used to be. I like Kolot very much. I think it's extremely important program. And I learned a lot from there. Kolot taught me what the Jewish morale is, okay? And what Jews should do. And it helped me very much in the recent 2 weeks to express my own view, relying on a Jewish morale, which I believe should be a leading, not policy, but attitude by many Israelis to those refugees. Behave like a Jew. Behave like a Jew.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I think with this note, we'll finish. The chat is extremely vibrant, and I'm so happy with this conversation. I cannot read everything. I may read just Neil Katz. I'm a rabbi in Texas, and I saw your message. I feel your pain, and I'm sorry for this disconnect. The Jewish soul is a mix of religion, people, and land, and I pray they can connect to the land component at some point. So the message goes on, but there are a lot of wonderful comments here, and I'm sorry that I cannot read all of them. I would like to let you go, Minister Shai, because you had a long day that started, I think, 16 hours ago or so.
The car stopped. So sorry? I'm home. My wife was waiting for dinner. I said, I'm coming. She's eagerly to have dinner. The time is 9:10. It's not American time for dinner. It's Israeli time for dinner.
Yeah, and you totally deserve, your meal, and you have, your fights with the Minister of Interior to lead for tomorrow. So
I have to be as strong as possible for tomorrow next chapter.
Yeah. So thank you so much for giving us the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Persico. Thank you so much, Julia, for bringing your voice that is so important.
Yes.
And thanks everyone for joining us for this conversation that has been just the beginning, I think, of exploring, this very sensitive area. And as Minister Shai said, opening up the conversation, which I think is a start.
Thank you, Anat. Thank you, everyone.
Anat.
Toda.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Regards from Jerusalem. Bye-bye.